"This seat isn't for you. Go back to coach," Karen hissed, blocking Dr. Reed with an outstretched arm. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, as Evelyn's grip tightened on the silver cooler carrying a boy's only chance at life. What no one realized was that this ordinary passenger had the authority to end the flight with a single phone call, and she was seconds away from doing exactly that. The sterile, climate-controlled air of the Polaris Lounge at San Francisco International Airport hummed with a quiet energy. It was a sanctuary of hushed conversations, the clinking of real silverware, and the scent of expensive coffee and leather. In a secluded corner, away from the floor to ceiling windows that showcased the ballet of jets on the tarmac, sat Dr. Evelyn Reed. To the casual observer, she was a portrait of understated elegance. Her tailored charcoal gray pantsuit was impeccably pressed, her low-heeled leather pumps polished to a soft gleam. A silk scarf with a subtle geometric pattern added a touch of color at her throat. Her hair was styled in neat, professional locks pulled back from her face that was calm and focused. She wasn't scrolling on her phone or thumbing through a magazine. Her attention was solely on the sleek silver medical-grade transport cooler that sat on the seat beside her. Its small digital display glowing with a steady, reassuring temperature reading. At 46, Dr. Reed had earned her place in sanctuaries like this. She was one of the world's leading cardiothoracic surgeons, a pioneer in xenotransplantation and complex pediatric heart surgeries. Her hands, currently resting gently on her lap, had restarted the hearts of infants the size of a teacup and performed miracles that had been written up in medical journals across the globe. Today, she was the custodian of a miracle in a box. Inside that cooler, suspended in a state of cryopreservation, was a heart. Not just any heart, but a genetically engineered lab-grown organ. A perfect, one-of-a-kind match for a 17-year-old boy named Leo Sterling who lay waiting in a specialized ward at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. The flight was Global Charter Airlines Flight 714, a nonstop red-eye to Baltimore on Washington International. While it was a publicly bookable flight, its entire schedule, its very existence on this specific day, had been orchestrated by the Sterling Foundation. They had essentially subsidized the flight to ensure this exact route was available at this exact time, with a seat in first class reserved for Dr. Reed and her precious cargo. The logistics were a symphony of precision. The clock was ticking. From the moment the organ was activated, they had a window of less than 12 hours for it to be successfully transplanted. Every minute mattered. A polite chime announced the boarding call for her flight. Evelyn took a deep centering breath, gave the cooler's display one last check, and rose. She moved with an unhurried grace, her carry-on gliding silently behind her, the cooler held firmly in one hand. She presented her boarding pass, seat 2A first class, to the gate agent, who smiled respectfully. "Have a wonderful flight, Dr. Reed." As she walked down the jet bridge, a senior flight attendant, with a stiff posture and a name tag that read, Karen, stood at the aircraft door. Karen Miller was a purser with 22 years of service. In her mind, she was the gatekeeper of the premium cabin, the guardian of its perceived exclusivity. She greeted the passengers in front of Evelyn with practiced, toothy smiles, but as Dr. Reed approached, Karen's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something else, assessment suspicion. She watched Evelyn's simple, though expensive suit, her professional hairstyle, and her calm demeanor and an ugly preconceived narrative began to write itself in her mind. "Welcome aboard," Karen said, her tone a few degrees cooler than it had been for the previous passenger. "Thank you," Evelyn replied, preparing to turn left into the serene, spacious first-class cabin. Karen stepped slightly subtly, blocking her path. "Can I just see your boarding pass one more time, please?" It was a standard request, but her tone made it feel anything but. Evelyn held it out. Karen took it, her eyes lingering on the seat 2A designation for a beat too long. "You're in the first-class cabin," she stated, as if it were a question. "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice even. "Sat 2A." Karen handed the pass back, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Right this way," she said, her gesture clipped and dismissive. Evelyn ignored the slighter focus entirely on getting the cooler safely stowed and settling in for the journey. The first crack in the perfect, precise symphony of the day had appeared, But Evelyn, ever the professional, was determined to ignore it. The mission was all that mattered. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 7 fan was an oasis of muted tones and brushed metal. Each seat was a self-contained pod, offering privacy and luxury. Evelyn carefully placed the medical cooler under the seat in front of her, where it would be secure and within her sight for the entire flight. She settled into the plush leather of seat 2A, her body relaxing for the first time all day. She closed her eyes, visualizing the complex surgical procedure that lay ahead, the intricate dance of clamps, sutures, and bypass machines. The moment she would hold a young boy's life in her hands. A few minutes later, as the last of the first-class passengers were boarding, Karen Miller appeared at her seat. "Mom!" she began, her voice low, but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "I'm going to have to ask you to move," Evelyn opened her eyes. "I'm sorry." "This seat is reserved," Karen said, avoiding eye contact and instead looking at a manifest in her hand. "There must have been a mistake at the gate. My list shows this seat is for a Dr. Reed." A quiet, weary sigh escaped Evelyn's lips. "I am Dr. Reed." Karen finally looked at her, a skeptical frown etched on her face. "Right. Well, I need to see some identification." This was highly unusual. Boarding passes were scanned at the gate. ID was checked at security. A flight attendant demanding ID to verify a seat assignment was a clear breach of protocol designed for one purpose: intimidation. But Evelyn complied, pulling her driver's license from her wallet. "Evelyn Reed, as you can see." Karen glanced at the ID and then back at her manifest. The frown deepened. "This manifest says the seat was booked for a VIP passenger, a surgeon." The implication was thick and insulting that Evelyn, a black woman, couldn't possibly be the important surgeon the airline was expecting. "I am a surgeon," Evelyn said, her voice losing its warmth and becoming as precise and clinical as a scalpel. "And I am in my assigned seat. Is there a problem?" In seat 3C, a man named Arthur Finch, a sharp-eyed corporate lawyer in his late 50s, lowered his newspaper. He'd noticed the flight attendant's initial coldness at the door and was now watching the interaction with growing alarm. Karen seemed to puff up with indignation. "The problem, Mom," she said, leaning in and lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss, "is that passengers in coach are not permitted to just come up and sit in first class. Now, I'll give you one chance to go back to your real seat before I have to call the captain and have you removed for non-compliance." The accusation was so blatant, so steeped in prejudice that it momentarily stunned Evelyn. She looked at Karen's smug face, at the self-satisfied certainty in her eyes. This woman wasn't making a mistake. She was executing a bias. She had looked at Dr. Evelyn Reed and seen not a world-class surgeon, but a trespasser. "There is no real seat in coach for me," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dangerously calm level. "This is my seat. 2A. I suggest you check your systems again, and then I suggest you leave me alone so I can prepare for the 5-hour flight and the 14-hour surgery I have to perform when I land." Her words, meant to end the confrontation, only seemed to fuel Karen's conviction. "Oh, a surgery," she sneered, making air quotes with her fingers. "I've had enough of this. You're causing a disturbance." She straightened up, her voice now loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I need you to gather your things and move to the back of the plane immediately." Heads turned. The quiet murmur of the cabin ceased. Arthur Finch in 3C folded his newspaper deliberately and placed it on his lap. "This is outrageous," he said, his voice clear and commanding. "This woman has done nothing wrong. I saw her board. I heard your accusations. You are harassing her." Karen shot him a venomous look. "Sir, this is a crew matter. Please stay out of it." She turned her attention back to Evelyn. "Last chance. Are you moving, or am I calling security at this point?" The co-pilot, hearing the commotion, alerted the captain. Captain David Evans, a veteran with a placid demeanor, emerged from the cockpit. "What's the trouble here, Karen?" Captain Karen said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "This passenger is refusing to leave a first-class seat. She claims to be a doctor. Reed, who has the seat reserved, but she's clearly lying. She's becoming disruptive." Captain Evans looked at Evelyn, then at Karen, a weary expression on his face. He was a man who hated conflict and preferred to trust his senior crew. "Mom," he said to Evelyn, his tone placating, "perhaps we could just clear this up. If there's been a mix-up, there is no mix-up. Evelyn interrupted her patience, finally snapping. She had remained calm, compliant, and professional. She had been insulted, accused, and threatened. And now the captain was siding with his prejudiced crew member, prioritizing a smooth departure over basic decency. The clock was ticking. The viability of the organ in the cooler depended on a stress-free, on-time flight. This circus of bigotry was creating a critical risk. She looked from the captain's indecisive face to Karen's triumphant sneer, and in that moment she made a decision. The symphony of precision had been shattered by a cacophony of prejudice. Protocol had been broken. The mission was now compromised. She reached into her handbag, but it wasn't for her ID this time. She pulled out a sleek satellite phone. Karen scoffed. "Oh, who are you calling your lawyer?" Evelyn ignored her. She held Captain Evans' gaze. "Captain," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion, "you have failed to control your crew. You have allowed a situation to escalate based on racial bias. As a result, you have compromised the integrity of this transport. You gave me no other choice." She dialed a single speed dial number. It rang once before a voice answered. "This is the command center." Evelyn's next words were spoken with chilling clarity, loud enough for the captain and Karen to hear every single one. "This is Dr. Reed. Authenticate Nightingale 1. There was a pause. "I am on GCA 7014. The transport environment is no longer secure. The crew is hostile. I am declaring a code Umbra." A silence fell over the first-class cabin. A code Umbra. The words meant nothing to Karen or the other passengers, but in the cockpit, the co-pilot's face went pale. He had seen the flight briefing. He knew what a code Umbra meant. Captain Evans stared at Evelyn, a dawning horror spreading across his features. "Mom? Dr. Reed, you can't." Evelyn held up a hand, listening to the voice on the phone. She then spoke her final words into the device. "That is correct. The asset is at risk by the authority granted to me by the Sterling Foundation and the Federal Aviation Administration under Special Transport Mandate 70B. I am canceling this flight effective immediately." The silence that followed Dr. Reed's declaration was heavier than the aircraft itself. It was a dense, suffocating vacuum, broken only by the faint hum of the cabin's ventilation system. The passengers exchanged bewildered glances. Canceling the flight. Was that even possible? It sounded like something out of a movie. Karen Miller's smug expression had dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're what? You're canceling the flight, lady? You are delusional. Captain, call airport security and have this woman arrested." But Captain Evans wasn't looking at Karen. His eyes were locked on Dr. Reed, and the color had drained from his face. The phrase Special Transport Mandate 77B had hit him like a physical blow. It was an obscure but incredibly powerful regulation he'd only read about in senior training modules. A rule pertaining to critical life or death national interest cargo, which gave the designated courier absolute authority over the transport's conditions up to and including the termination of the flight itself. He had never in his 30-year career imagined he would encounter it. Before he could even form a sentence, the cockpit call light flashed insistently. The first officer, who had been listening from the doorway, scrambled back to answer it. His voice was a hushed, panicked murmur. A few seconds later, he looked out at Captain Evans, his eyes wide with terror. "Captain, it's SFO Tower. They've just received a direct order from the FAA Command Center in D.C. Our flight clearance has been revoked. We're grounded." The words hung in the air, sharp and lethal. It was real. Karen stumbled back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. No, that's not possible. Her world, built on the rigid hierarchy of seniority and airline regulations, was crumbling around her. A passenger couldn't do this. A black woman in a pantsuit couldn't just say words and bring a multi-million-dollar operation to a screeching halt. It defied the very laws of the universe as she understood them. Dr. Reed calmly disconnected the call on her satellite phone and placed it back in her bag. She looked at Captain Evans, her expression not one of triumph, but of profound disappointment. "As I said, Captain, you gave me no other choice. The protocol for a code Umbra is clear. Once the security of the transport is compromised by the crew, The mission is aborted and rerouted via a secure channel. The well-being of the asset is the only priority. The asset. The captain whispered the pieces, finally clicking into place. He glanced at the silver cooler under her seat. My God, the organ. Arthur Finch, the lawyer in 3C, let out a low whistle. He was connecting the dots as well. This wasn't about an upgraded seat. This was about something life or death. The captain's intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Evans. There has been an unforeseen logistical issue. We are required to return to the gate. All passengers will need to deplane. We have no further information at this time. Cabin crew prepare for return to gate. A wave of groans and frustrated murmurs swept through the entire plane. In economy, passengers began to grumble about missed connections and ruined plans. In first class, they just stared first at Dr. Agreed and then at a now ashen-faced Karen Miller. They had all been witnesses. They had seen the flight attendant's hostility, heard her accusations, and now they were witnessing the incomprehensible consequence. As the plane began its slow, ponderous push back toward the gate, the airline's machinery on the ground was exploding in chaos. In the Global Charter Airlines Operations Center, screens flashed red. Mark Unnell, the vice president of West Coast Operations, had his phone pressed so hard to his ear it hurt. On the other end of the line was not some mid-level FAA official. It was Robert Sterling, the billionaire philanthropist, technology magnate, and most importantly, the father of the boy for whom the heart was intended. His voice was not yelling. It was something far more terrifying, a low-controlled Arctic rage. Mark Sterling's voice cut through the line. I am currently looking at a live feed of GCA 71, the flight my foundation paid 7 figures to secure returning to the gate. My chief of logistics has just informed me that Dr. Reed was forced to declare a code umbra due to crew harassment. Explain to me in very small words how you allowed your people to compromise a mission to save my son's life. Marco O'Connell felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. Mr. Sterling, I'm just getting the details myself. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Sterling's voice dropped even further. Your purser accused one of the world's top surgeons of stealing a seat. She threatened to have her removed from the plane. She did this while Dr. Reed was transporting a time-sensitive, irreplaceable biological asset. This is not a misunderstanding, Mark. This is a catastrophic failure. My team is already en route to SFO. A Gulfstream G650 will be on the tarmac in 40 minutes to retrieve Dr. Reed and her cargo. Your airline, however, has a much bigger problem. Back on the plane, the seatbelt sign pinged off as they docked at the gate. The jet bridge reconnected with a soft thud. No one moved. They were all watching Karen Miller, who stood frozen in the galley, her face a mask of horrified realization. The entire edifice of her seniority, her authority, her carefully constructed world of rules and regulations had been obliterated by one woman's quiet, decisive action. She had picked a fight with the wrong person, not understanding that the woman she saw as an imposter held more power in that moment than the captain, the airline, and perhaps even the airport itself. The unraveling had just begun. The moment the aircraft door opened, the atmosphere changed from tense confusion to stark reality. 2 stern-faced individuals in dark suits, clearly not airline employees, briskly walked past the bewildered gate agent and onto the jet bridge. They were part of Robert Sterling's private security and logistics team. They approached the first-class cabin with a single-minded purpose. One of them, a tall man with an earpiece, addressed Dr. Reed with quiet respect. Dr. Reed, I'm Michael, Mr. Sterling's head of logistics. We're here to escort you. The jet is being fueled on the private tarmac. Evelyn nodded, her composure unwavering. She retrieved the silver cooler, her movements as deliberate as ever. She was no longer a passenger on Global Charter Airlines. She was a mission-critical asset being extracted from a compromised zone. As she stood to leave, her eyes met Karen Miller's for a brief final moment. There was no pity in Evelyn's gaze, nor was there anger. There was only the cool, detached assessment of a surgeon observing a source of contamination that had been successfully excised. Karen flinched as if struck. The contempt she had shown just 20 minutes ago had curdled into a thick, paralyzing fear. She watched as the two men escorted Dr. Reed and her precious cargo off the plane, treating her with a deference Karen reserved only for the airline's top executives. As Evelyn deplaned, the passengers finally began to stir their quiet shock, giving way to angry questions. "What is going on?" a man in business class demanded. "Why was the flight canceled?" Captain Evans, looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago, stepped out of the cockpit. We will have to ask everyone to deplane. Please see the gate agents for rebooking information." "I apologize for the inconvenience." His voice was hollow, the standard corporate apology rendered meaningless by the sheer strangeness of the situation. Down on the tarmac, the situation was escalating at lightning speed. Mark Unell, the airline VP, had broken every speed limit, driving to the airport. He now stood beside the grounded 707, watching a sleek, white Gulf-Stream jet taxi into a nearby position, its engines whining with an urgency that mocked the silent, inert bulk of his own company's aircraft. He was on the phone with the airline's legal counsel, and the news was grim. "It's worse than we thought," the lawyer said. "The Sterling Foundation isn't just suing for the cost of the flight. They're filing for gross negligence and endangerment. The contract we signed had a specific mission integrity clause. It stipulated that any delay or disruption caused by airline personnel that jeopardized the transport would result in a penalty of $50 million. $50 million plus all associated costs for the routing." Mark felt the blood drain from his face. $50 million for one rude flight attendant. She wasn't just rude, Mark. She actively obstructed a federally mandated special medical transport. We aren't just in breach of a commercial contract. We might have violated federal law. The FAA is launching a full investigation. This is a full-blown Category 5 catastrophe. Meanwhile, the deplaned passengers of GCA 7114 flooded the terminal, a chaotic mob of anger and confusion. The gate agents had no answers, offering only flimsy meal vouchers and overwhelmed apologies. The story, however, was already taking shape. Arthur Finch, the lawyer from seat 3C, was surrounded by a small group of his fellow first-class passengers. "It was the flight attendant," he explained in his precise, authoritative voice. "She targeted that woman from the moment she boarded, accused her of being in the wrong seat, threatened to have her removed. It was a disgusting display of prejudice. Turns out the woman she was harassing was the one person who could pull the plug on the whole operation. And she did." The story began to spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into phone calls. Phone calls turned into social media posts. The hashtags Flight to 74 and Global Charter Nightmare started trending within the hour. Passengers from the flight were uploading videos of the chaos, telling their version of the story, and the narrative was consistent. A flight attendant's bigotry had gotten an entire flight canceled. Back in the now empty first-class cabin, Captain Evans sat in the pilot seat, his head in his hands. Karen Miller stood in the galley, being questioned by an irate Mark O'Connell. "What were you thinking, Karen?" He seethed, his voice a low growl. "What could possibly have possessed you to do that?" Karen was trembling, her carefully maintained composure shattered. I thought she was lying. She didn't look. She didn't fit the profile. I was trying to protect the integrity of the cabin." "Protect the integrity of the cabin?" Mark repeated, his voice laced with venom. "You just cost this company over $50 million. You've triggered an FAA investigation. You've made us the lead story on every news channel by tomorrow morning. All because you didn't like the look of a passenger who was in fact the most important person on this entire continent tonight." He pointed a shaking finger toward the door. "You are suspended pending termination. Get your things. An escort will see you out of the airport. Do not talk to anyone. You are now a legal liability of immense proportions." Karen stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. It was all slipping away. Her job, her reputation, her pension, all of it vaporized in a 20-a-nut standoff, born of her own ugly assumptions. As she walked through the empty plane one last time, the ghost of Dr. Reed's calm, disappointed face seemed to be everywhere. She had poked a bear only to discover it was a dragon, and the fire was just beginning to rain down. As the Gulfstream G60 carrying Dr. Reed ascended into the night sky, leaving the chaos of SFO behind, the focus shifted from the drama on the ground to the silent ticking clock inside the silver cooler. Inside the luxurious cabin, Evelyn was not celebrating a victory. Her face was etched with a grim, focused intensity. The confrontation had wasted nearly 45 minutes of a critically narrow window. She was now in a race against time, a race that had been needlessly handicapped. Robert Sterling was on a secure video call with her from a command center he had set up at Johns Hopkins. His face, usually a mask of corporate steel, was filled with a father's raw anxiety. "Evelyn, what's the status of the asset?" he asked, his voice strained. Evelyn was running a diagnostic on the cooler's environmental controls. "The internal temperature remained stable, Robert. The stasis field was not compromised. Biometrically, it's still perfectly viable, but we've lost time. We'll be landing in Baltimore at approximately 6:15 a.m. Eastern Time. That pushes the start of the procedure back. The post-transplant viability window will be tighter. There's less room for error." "Do what you need to do," Sterling said, his voice firm. "Whatever you need when you land, it will be there." To understand the magnitude of what Karen Miller had done, one had to understand the story of Leo Sterling. He was not just a rich man's son. Leo was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, a rare congenital defect where the left side of the heart is severely underdeveloped. He had survived 3 open heart surgeries before the age of 5. He had lived his entire life on a cocktail of medications, unable to run, play sports, or even walk up a flight of stairs without becoming breathless. By age 17, his heart was failing catastrophically. A standard human heart transplant was not an option. His unique physiology and antibody profile meant his body would reject almost any donor organ. His only hope was a revolutionary experimental technology developed by a biotech firm that Sterling's foundation had funded. They had taken Leo's own cells, reprogrammed them, and used them to grow a new heart on a biological scaffold. It was a perfect genetic match, a true medical miracle. The process had taken 2 years and hundreds of millions of dollars. The organ itself was quite literally priceless, and the only surgeon on earth with the skill, experience, and specific training to perform the transplant was Dr. Evelyn Reed. She had been part of the project from the beginning. She knew the organ's unique cellular structure, its custom-designed vascular connections. Her hands were the only ones trusted to place this miracle of science into Leo's chest. This was the asset whose transport Karen Miller had compromised. This was the VIP passenger she had refused to believe in. Her small act of prejudice hadn't just inconvenienced a traveler. It had placed the culmination of years of scientific research and the life of a young man in jeopardy. At Johns Hopkins, the surgical team was on standby, the operating room prepped and sterile. Leo Sterling lay in his hospital bed, aware that the heart that would save his life was currently flying across the country. He was scared but hopeful. His parents, Robert and Maria Sterling, kept a vigil by his side, their immense fortune completely useless as they waited, just like any other parents, praying for their child. The news of the flight cancellation had reached them via Robert's frantic logistics team. For a terrifying half hour, all they knew was that the mission was compromised. Maria had nearly collapsed, imagining a plane crash or a catastrophic failure of the transport unit. When the truth was revealed that it was all due to a flight attendant's bigotry, their terror morphed into a cold, hard fury. Robert Sterling was a man who understood power. He had built empires, disrupted industries, and bent markets to his will. Now he would direct that same relentless focus toward global charter airlines. "Mark," he said in another call to the beleaguered VP, having landed him personally, "I want the name of the flight attendant, the captain, every single person involved in this fiasco. My legal team will be deposing all of them. We're not just suing you for the financial damages. We're suing for punitive damages, for reckless endangerment. And I will personally fund a media campaign that will make your airline's name synonymous with incompetence and prejudice. By the time I am done, people will cross the street to avoid flying global charter. The threat was not an idle one. The full weight of the Sterling Empire was about to come crashing down on the airline. But for now, all that mattered was the Gulfstream jet streaking across the dark American landscape and the brilliant surgeon inside who was mentally preparing for the most important performance of her life. Her timeline now dangerously compressed by an act of senseless intolerance. while Dr. Reed was scrubbing in at Johns Hopkins, meticulously preparing to save a life. The life Karen Miller had known was being systematically dismantled. The karma that found her was not a single swift thunderclap of fate. It was a slow, grinding, and brutally meticulous demolition, leaving no stone of her former existence unturned. It was a masterclass in consequences, delivered in 4 devastating acts. Act 1, the professional annihilation. The summons to the Global Charter Airlines corporate headquarters came via a cold, impersonal email the very next morning. The meeting was not in a familiar HR office, but in the sterile, intimidating expanse of the main executive boardroom on the top floor. The vast mahogany table reflected the grim gray sky outside, and at its head sat not just Mark Unell, but the airline's CEO, Gerald Finney, and a trio of lawyers whose faces were masks of predatory calm. There was no offer of coffee, no pleasantries. This was not a disciplinary hearing. It was a sentencing. Miss Miller Finney began, his voice devoid of any warmth. We have reviewed the captain's report, the statements from 10 separate first-class passengers, including one Mr. Arthur Finch of the law firm Finch Adler in Vance, and we have listened to the audio from the cockpit recorder, which captured your exchange with Dr. Reed. The board has been briefed. Our primary shareholders have been placated. Now we deal with the source of the problem. Karen, sleepless and trembling, attempted to mount a defense. Sir, with all due respect, I have 22 years of impeccable service. I was following my intuition. My job is to maintain the security and integrity of the premium cabin. The passenger was uncooperative and didn't seem to fit the VIP profile provided. One of the lawyers let out a dry, humorous chuckle. Fit the profile. Ms. Miller, do you know what the profile for Dr. Evelyn Reed is? It's a woman who has won the Lasaska Debaki Clinical Medical Research Award. It's a woman who holds patents for 3 different synthetic vascular grafts. It's a woman who Robert Sterling, a man whose net worth exceeds the market cap of this airline, trusts with his son's life. Your intuition, as you call it, was nothing more than cheap, unadulterated prejudice, and it has set fire to this company. CEO Finney slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a preliminary financial assessment of the damages. Let me be clearer, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. The penalty clause in our contract with the Sterling Foundation is $50 million. The cost of the grounded aircraft passenger reallocation and overtime is another $15 million. Our stock dropped 8% in pre-market trading this morning, representing a shareholder value loss of over $120 million. And the brand damage. The cost of the PR campaign to even begin to detoxify the Global Charter Karen meme that is now trending worldwide is immeasurable. All because you decided you were a better judge of character than a paid and confirmed ticket. He leaned forward. Your 22 years of service don't matter. Your pension is forfeited under the gross misconduct clause of your employment contract. You are terminated effective immediately. You will be escorted from the building. If you speak to the press, our lawsuit against you will not be merely financial. It will be personal, and we will litigate you into absolute oblivion. Is that understood? Her professional life ended in that room. Her security pass was deactivated before she even reached the elevator. The walk through the office was a gauntlet of averted eyes and sudden intense interest in computer screens. Her former colleagues, people she had shared holidays and layovers with for 2 decades, looked right through her. She was no longer a person. She was a contamination. Her subsequent attempts to find work in the industry were a humiliating exercise in futility. Her name was now infamous. She was a liability no airline would ever take on. Her career wasn't just over, it had been erased. Actual, the financial ruin. A month later, the second blow landed. A thick envelope arrived not from Global Charter, but from their external litigation firm. The airline was making good on its threat. They were filing a civil lawsuit against her, citing her role as a senior purser and the duty of care and professional responsibility she had flagrantly violated. They were holding her personally liable for a fraction of the damages. The number stated in the filing was $2.5 million. Her lawyer, a weary public defender, who looked at her with a mixture of pity and disbelief, explained the grim reality. They don't expect to ever get this money from you, Karen. This isn't about recovery, it's about punishment. It's a PR move to show their shareholders and Robert Sterling that they've thrown the book at you, then set the book on fire, and then buried the ashes. We can fight it, but they have unlimited legal resources. It will drain every cent you have, and you will still lose. He was right. The battle decimated her life savings. She sold her condo, the one tangible symbol of her successful career, to pay the mounting legal fees. She sold her car. She moved into a cramped, bleak apartment in a neighborhood she used to fly over at 30,000 FT without a second glance. The court eventually passed a summary judgment against her. Her wages from a soul-crushing job as a cashier at a big box store, where she had to endure the snickers of customers who recognized her, were garnished. She was trapped in a financial prison, destined to work for the rest of her life to pay off a debt to the company she had given her life, to a debt born from a single ugly moment of pride and prejudice. Act the thread, the social exile. The news cycle was merciless. Karen became a caricature, a villain in the national drama. Cable news pundits used her as a symbol of everything wrong with customer service, with corporate America, with modern society. Viral videos dissected her actions. Her photo was everywhere. She couldn't go to the grocery store without feeling the burn of strangers' stares, without hearing the hushed whispers. That's her. That's the flight attendant. Her social life evaporated. Friends she had known for years suddenly became distant. The invitations to dinner parties stopped. Phone calls went to voicemail and were never returned. They were afraid of the taint, the association with the woman who had become a national punchline. Her sister Sarah was her only remaining pillar of support, but even her family felt the strain, fielding angry calls from distant relatives and suffering the embarrassment of their connection to the infamous airline Karen. She was an outcast, isolated in a world that seemed to despise her, haunted by a digital ghost of her own creation that would follow her for the rest of her days. Napto, the cruelest irony. A year crawled by a year of humiliation and hardship. Then the universe decided it was time for the final, most exquisitely cruel act. Her sister Sarah, her one loyal confidant, began to feel unwell. It started with fatigue, then shortness of breath. The doctors were initially puzzled, but after a battery of tests, the diagnosis was delivered like a death sentence, a rare and brutally aggressive form of cardiomyopathy. Her heart was destroying itself. Local cardiologists were helpless. Sarah's condition was deteriorating at an alarming rate. Desperate, Karen spent her nights scouring the internet, selling what little she had left to pay for consultations. They found one last sliver of hope, an experimental gene therapy and stem cell treatment program. It was revolutionary, groundbreaking, and their last chance. The program was only offered at one hospital in the world with the technology and expertise to administer it, Johns Hopkins. After months of frantic applications and pulling every string they had, Sarah was accepted for a preliminary consultation. Karen drove her across 3 states, her stomach in knots with a mixture of terror and hope. They sat in the polished, intimidating waiting room of the hospital's advanced cardiology wing. Finally, a nurse called Sarah's name. They were led into a bright, modern consultation room. A few minutes later, the door opened and the medical team entered. Leading them was the head of the program, a woman whose calm, authoritative presence filled the room. She carried a tablet with Sarah's medical data, her expression one of deep professional focus. She looked up from the tablet to greet her new patient and the accompanying family member. Her eyes, calm, intelligent, and piercing, met Karen's. It was Dr. Evelyn Reed. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the world stopped. The air in Karen's lungs turned to ice. It couldn't be. It was a cosmic joke of impossible cruelty. The woman whose reputation she had tried to tarnish, whose world-altering mission she had nearly wrecked, was now the one person on the planet who could save her sister's life. Dr. Reed's expression did not change. There was no flicker of shock, no flash of vengeful recognition, no hint of their shared toxic history. If she recognized Karen, she gave no sign. Her focus was absolute. She was a doctor, and this was her patient. She turned her gentle, compassionate gaze to the frail young woman on the examination table. "Sarah," Dr. Reed began, her voice, the epitome of reassuring competence. "My name is Dr. Reed. I've read your entire file. It's a complex case, but I believe our program has a very good chance of helping you. We're going to take very good care of you." Karen sat frozen in the corner chair, rendered utterly insignificant. This was the true karma. It wasn't revenge, it was relevance. She was nothing. Her past bigotry, her insults, her entire existence were meaningless in the face of this woman's profound dedication to her calling. She could only sit there, a silent ghost in the room, her heart pounding with shame and terror, forced to place all her hope for her sister's future into the skilled, steady hands of the woman she had been too blind and too small to ever truly see. The operating room at Johns Hopkins was a theater of hushed reverence, a sterile world bathed in the stark white light of surgical lamps. For 16 consecutive hours, Dr. Evelyn Reed stood at its center, a bastion of unwavering focus. The procedure to place the bioengineered heart into Leo Sterling's chest was every bit as complex as anticipated, a microscopic ballet requiring a level of artistry that few could comprehend. Her team, a hand-picked ensemble of the world's best, moved around her in a silent, practiced rhythm, anticipating her every need, every command. There was no thought of GCA 74 torn, no memory of Karen Miller's sneering face. In this room, such worldly pettiness did not exist. There was only the mission. Dr. Reed's hands, steady and sure, performed the intricate work of micro-uring coronary arteries, thinner than a strand of silk. She calibrated the aortic outflow with a precision measured in millim. Her mind, a supercompute processing thousands of biometric data points simultaneously. The most critical moment came after the final connection was made, the delicate process of reperfusion, allowing blood to flow into the new dormant organ for the first time. The team held a collective breath. The rhythmic beep of the heart-lung machine was the only sound. Dr. Reed removed the final cross clamp. "Stand by," she said, her voice a calm command that cut through the tension. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The monitor remained flat. Leo's life hung suspended in that deafening silence. Then a single tentative spike on the ECG, a flutter, and then another. It was followed by a third, stronger beat. A perfect, steady, life-affirming rhythm began to fill the room, displayed in a vibrant green line on the monitor. The heart, a miracle of science, and will was beating. It was alive, a wave of palpable relief, a force almost physical in its intensity, washed through the operating room. Quiet murmurs of, "It's perfect and incredible," rippled through the team. Dr. Reed, however, remained motionless for another full minute, her eyes locked on the monitors, ensuring every pressure and output was optimal. Only then did she allow herself a small, weary nod. "A beautiful union," she stated, her voice resonating with profound satisfaction. "Let's begin closing. He has a long life to start living." Leo Sterling's recovery was a series of quiet miracles. A week after the surgery, his father, Robert, stood by his bedside as a nurse removed his son's last oxygen tube. Leo took a breath, a deep, shuddering, and completely painless inhalation that filled his lungs to capacity for the first time in his 17 years of life. Tears streamed down the billionaire's face as he watched his son experience the simple, profound gift of air. 2 weeks later, Leo took his first steps, his legs shaky, but his chest strong, a steady beat echoing where a fluttery weakness had always been. On the day of his discharge, the Sterling family met with Dr. Reed in her office. Robert Sterling, a man accustomed to commanding every room he entered, was humbled and deferential. "Evelyn," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "thanking you feels inadequate. You performed a miracle." He paused, his expression hardening as he recalled the events that led to this moment. "You did it despite being subjected to a level of ignorance and disrespect that infuriates me to my core. The settlement with the airline is done. They will pay. But what they did to you, what they almost cost us, I will never forget." Dr. Reed offered a gracious small smile. Her focus, as always, was on the path forward. "What matters, Robert, is that Leo is going home. The science worked. The team performed flawlessly. The rest is just noise. Your son's future is the only signal that matters." The noise, however, had permanent consequences for global charter airlines. The massive financial settlement was only the beginning. Under immense pressure from the FAA and the public, they were forced to create a mandatory company-wide diversity and implicit bias training program. In a move of supreme irony, they named it the GCA Horizon Initiative, and as part of their settlement, humbly requested that Dr. Reed herself consult on its curriculum. She agreed, providing her expertise, not for the airline's sake, but for the sake of future passengers who might look like her. A year later, a former colleague of Karen's sat in a sterile conference room, watching a video of Dr. Reed speaking eloquently about the dangers of snap judgments and the responsibility that comes with a position of authority. The lesson had been institutionalized, a permanent scar on the corporate culture. For Karen Miller, the lesson was far more personal and agonizing. Sarah's treatment at Johns Hopkins lasted 6 months. For 6 months, Karen was a fixture in the hospital's corridors, a silent shadow trailing her sister to every appointment. And at every major consultation, there was Dr. Reed. She was always professional, always compassionate, her attention focused solely on Sarah. She would explain complex medical data with simple clarity, answer Sarah's questions with patience, and offer a reassuring touch on her arm. She never once spoke to Karen directly beyond a polite professional nod if their eyes happened to meet. That silence was Karen's true punishment. It was a constant damning reminder of her own insignificance in Dr. Reed's world. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no tearful apology, no cathartic absolution. Karen craved it, rehearsing speeches of regret in her head. But the opportunity never came. Dr. Reed's unwavering professionalism denied her the very stage she had tried to command on that airplane. She was forced to simply watch in humbling silence as the woman she had dehumanized worked with tireless grace to save the only person she had left. The treatment was a resounding success. Sarah's heart function stabilized and began to improve her prognosis, shifting from terminal to manageable. On the day of Sarah's discharge, as they were preparing to leave, Dr. Reed came by for a final check-in. As she turned to go, Karen finally found a sliver of courage. "Doctor," she began, her voice a choked whisper. "Dr. Reed, Doctor paused at the door and looked back. Not at Karen, but at Sarah, who was beaming with a healthy glow Karen hadn't seen in years. Her expression was one of simple clinical satisfaction. "Your sister is a fighter," she said, her voice gentle, but directed entirely at her patient. "She responded to the therapy better than we could have hoped. Just focus on her continued recovery now. That's all that matters." And then she was gone. With that final dispassionate act of professionalism, the verdict was delivered. Dr. Reed had moved on back to her world of saving lives and pushing the boundaries of science. Her victory was not in Karen's ruin, but in the steady beat of Leo Sterling's new heart and the recovering smile of Sarah Miller. Karen was left in the aftermath. Her life was a landscape of financial ruin and social exile. But standing next to her was her sister, alive and breathing, a living testament to the grace she was never offered a chance to ask for. She had been a gatekeeper of a small, meaningless kingdom and had tried to bar the entry of a queen. The queen had not struck her down. She had simply walked past, leaving Karen to drown in the moat of her own making, forever indebted to a magnanimity she could never comprehend and would never be able to repay. This story serves as a powerful reminder that prejudice is never a victimless act. Karen Miller's assumptions, born from a bias she likely never questioned, set off a chain reaction that threatened a young man's life and ultimately destroyed her own. On the other hand, Dr. Evelyn Reed's response, her calm authority, her decisive action, and ultimately her profound professionalism showcases the incredible power of dignity in the face of intolerance. It proves that you never truly know who you're talking to, and the person you choose to underestimate might just be the one holding all the cards. What do you think was Karen's fate? A just case of karma, or was it too severe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and consequence resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories where karma delivers the final unforgettable verdict. Thank you for listening.